Hello and welcome back to the Apscc 2021 webinar series. I'm Christopher Slaughter, your MC for the series. Today, the focus is on in-flight connectivity. IFC Satcom Beyond 2020 Turbulence is our title today. Obviously, 2020, not a great year for the aviation industry, is probably putting it mildly. So that the knock-on effect on the IFC market with the overall aviation industry and the slump that it was, obviously, you know, a very interesting time in the industry, and managing expectations for the future is very, very important. We have an excellent panel ahead of us today. Vivek Prasad from NSR is our moderator today, featuring speakers from across the industry, both Eutelsat and Inmarsat, as well as GoGo and Global Eagle. So please take it away, Vivek.
Hello everyone, my name is Vivek and I am a senior analyst with Northern Sky Research. I am excited to be moderating today's session on topic in-flight connectivity, Satcom Beyond 2020 Turbulence. In the panel we have Jax Baum, Senior Vice President, Head of Aero Mobility Business Line Eutelsat, Nick Sylvester, Regional Sales Director, Middle East and Africa GoGo, Michael Pigot, Executive Vice President, Connectivity, Global Eagle Entertainment, and David Coyley, Regional Vice President, APAC Aviation Inmarsat. Thanks all the panel members for joining the discussion today. As we all know that the in-flight connectivity market has been severely hit due to COVID, and it lost its momentum because of the global health crisis, as aviation and related industries kind of nosedived with greater than 50% drop in passenger air traffic in March 2020, and no link in the value chain could remain immune to this kind of impact, be it from an airline point of view or to satellite or service provider point of view. So before we begin our discussion, I would request the panel members to briefly introduce their business and how has been the year 2020 for them, if they can introduce that, and if they can explain that as well in 3 to 4 minutes, that will be helpful. Jax, you might start.
My name is Jax Burham. I work with Eutelsat as leading the sort of airborne initiative. So airborne is commercial, general aviation, drones, and any emerging sector, you know, urban airborne mobility, etc. And Eutelsat is the third largest satellite company. We predominantly do video and data. And yes, 2020 been a tough year, but from our perspective, I think maybe we weren't quite as exposed to some of the risk areas that some of our peers are. And we were sort of able to deliver a relatively robust set of performance financials. So EBITDA was good, the overall revenue target was good. But we are clearly cognizant that, you know, 20 has been a terrible year. 21 is unlikely to be that much better in some ways. And unfortunately, whatever strands or seeds of hope we had about airborne recovering faster, I don't think that's going to be the case. And it's nothing to do with opinion. I think that's just where we are as a world. So, you know, if you have a very dispersed revenue chain like we do, which is video, government, IoT, enterprise, I think you have some levels of immunity versus if you're a little bit more leveraged or extended within the mobility sectors. So we're clearly sort of watching and monitoring business as usual, working with our partners, and also seeing what the emerging sector is.
Sure, thanks for that. And just a follow-up question, for the mobility market from a satellite operator point of view, what do you feel could be the time period for the recovery in terms of coming back to the similar revenue levels as 2019?
Well, this is just my personal opinion, so I'm not speaking on behalf of Eutelsat and our analysts, but I think from what I see, in terms of getting back to pre-2019 numbers, my personal feel is somewhere around 2024, 2025. But that's not to say we're not going to see regionality or specific hotspots of recovery, right? Maybe in North America or certain routes or certain locations, but we're going to be extremely prone to being affected by secondary lockdowns or secondary spikes, or, you know, how we deal with things. So people don't want to hear what I'm sometimes saying, but it's not because I'm trying to be pessimistic. It's just the facts are what they are, and you either adjust or temper yourself to it, or you place yourself in denial and simply hope things are better. So I'm a little bit more on the, yes, if it takes longer, I'd rather prep for it, and if it's faster, that's just upside. But we need to sort of find a way of modulating and working to whatever those speeds are going to be.
Thanks for that. Nick, you might briefly explain the business and how has been clearly for GoGo, a lot has happened in 2020. So if you can briefly explain that to the audience, it will be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. So my name is Nick Sylvester. I'm the Regional Sales Director for GoGo Commercial Aviation. I focus on the Middle East and Africa region. There's no doubt the last year, 2020, was a terrible year for our industry. And from GoGo Commercial Aviation's position, we saw revenues basically drop off a cliff. It was an extremely challenging time. However, there was a huge upside to GoGo Commercial Aviation late last year, which was the acquisition. We were acquired by Intelsat, which was tremendously exciting for us. It now brings together, two big players in the market, and it really, now gives GoGo Commercial Aviation access to all of Intelsat's network and capacity, and it now gives Intelsat the opportunity to really become very close to airline customers. And they get access now to our 2KU product, all the services applications that go with that, as well as our people, and of course our commercial airline customers. So indeed, it has been a pretty awful year, but I think it's now turning into giving us much more reason to think that things are going to get better. I think this year, we've started to see a glimmer of light. Business aviation seems to have recovered much quicker than commercial aviation. But nevertheless, I agree. I think it's going to take some time to recover fully. But I have to see how that works, how airlines recover, and how the whole industry recovers, the rollout of vaccines and recovery. So.
Yeah, and for the Q4, clearly Q2 and Q3 were the most difficult period. For the Q4 2020, have you started witnessing any positive trends in the market and the industry? Nick?
Well, like I say, there are some chinks of light. We're starting to see some activity picking up, but to be honest, we think it will still be some time before our revenues recover, before our business recovers to anywhere near what it was pre-COVID-19.
Sure, thanks for that. David, if you could introduce yourself and the key trends of 2020 for Inmarsat, please.
Hi there, yes, I'm David Coyley, Regional Vice President for Asia Pacific for Inmarsat Aviation, based here in Singapore. I'm responsible for selling, in my primary role, responsible for selling our Global Express Ka-band satellite services as part of an in-flight connectivity solution to airlines in the commercial air transport space in the region. I'm also responsible for supporting some of our other colleagues looking at market access in countries such as India and China, so I get involved in a number of other projects. Inmarsat has obviously been affected, like all global businesses have, by the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. But one particular thing for Inmarsat, we are diversified. Aviation isn't the only market sector that we serve. Even within aviation, we serve commercial air transport, we serve the flight deck for safety services, and we support business and general aviation. And we have seen a mix across all of those segments within our aviation business, meaning that though aviation overall has been significantly affected, some parts of our business, particularly business and general aviation, has held up with where we've seen across the world the shift in the industry from commercial air transport to some growth even in business and general aviation. But outside of aviation, Inmarsat has also being diversified across markets such as maritime, what we call enterprise or the land applications of our services, and also government users of our services. We've seen an entirely different position. So aviation has been more affected. Our other core businesses are less so affected. So overall, Inmarsat has had a dent, as we are a player within aviation, but elsewhere we have not seen anything like as much effect. So overall, the business performance has been very robust in the circumstances, in the way that global industry and economies have been affected. What we are seeing at the moment, we've seen some interesting trends through 2020 as things developed. I think one of the colleagues earlier mentioned things like secondary waves or even third waves, recoveries in certain markets. We've seen all of that. We're very active across the globe. We've seen and we're watching very closely the way that the China market has recovered. We've seen the way that in North America and parts of Europe over the summer there was a mini renaissance. One particular thing that we've noticed is the way that even across the period of 2020, there have been changes and trends that we did not see before that are a direct function of what happened to us when we were all working and using connectivity during lockdown, and trends that are already starting to accelerate and actually affect our businesses and reinforce some of the features and characteristics that were apparent and that we were looking for before COVID have been accelerated during COVID, and we will continue to see and be able to work with those trends and the way that COVID has affected the demand for connectivity. So that is something that has borne out and in fact accentuated some of the trends that we were looking for anyway, particularly around digital transformation and how airlines are adapting to be able to thrive in the post-COVID environment.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Clearly, diversification was the major key for the immunity for most of the players in the industry, and you did mention about the trends which actually got accelerated because of COVID-19. Example, digital transformation. Was there any regional bias, like this was the region which was having the acceleration, and like, was that reason APAC or Middle East, or how do you define that? Like, was there a regional trend over that as well?
One trend that we did notice that was more the ways in which the airline industry supports regional industries. For example, I did note, I think, some of the major Chinese carriers, the traffic coming in and out of Incheon Airport in Seoul in Korea, the way that Korean Air also was able to benefit from its cargo operations, held up some of their activity, and Inmarsat in turn supports some of the flight deck safety communications for some of the cargo carriers around the world. So this trend that we saw in the way that business aviation, there was a shift, and there was a shift towards business aviation. There was a continuation and in fact growth in cargo carriers. We all know that cargo carrier space is like gold dust at the moment, and that meant that there was a continued trend in our businesses serving those markets, even though passengers themselves may not be flying. You know, we also saw trends with airlines continuing to fly aircraft, even though they may have had a handful of airplanes on because of the cargo carry capacity that those aircraft have. So those were the trends that meant things weren't quite as bad as you might have expected, given the overall impact of 50% of aircraft being grounded or 60% reduction in overall traffic numbers.
Okay, thanks for that, David. Michael, if you can introduce Global Eagle and how has been the year 2020 for you guys?
Sure. So I'm Mike Piggott. I'm EVP of Connectivity Operations at Global Eagle. So I run our aviation connectivity operations, actually our maritime connectivity operations as well. land and government as well, and I run our technology platforms team. So Global Eagle has had a fairly profound 2020. I think we've seen what all the other panelists have said. We've seen just a pretty devastating change to the aviation market, and that's led to, direct to us. We actually entered a restructuring process in about mid-year, which we're in the final stages of exiting. So 2020 for us, we saw obviously in our content operations teams, we saw flight counts just plummet, just essentially go to zero in many cases. And that obviously has a major effect on our ability to deliver entertainment. For in-flight connectivity, it was actually less impactful. At the end of the day, we had a pretty diversified business model. We were always a specialist in structuring our business models with customers to meet their needs. And that actually had a different impact depending on the customer. So for some of our customers, we did see just complete loss of service, loss of revenue, just from aircraft being grounded. But for some of our customers, actually, our business models supported our ability to continue to provide service that was appropriate for them and actually meet revenue needs. Now, for all our customers, we had to take a close look at our business models and how we can support them, because they were obviously going through some pretty devastating changes as well. But we looked at 2020. For 2020 for Global Eagle, it was really a take a step back, assess the market year, and plan for the future. And I would agree with Jags that the future is a long road. It's not going to be an instantaneous return in 2021. We have a few years to slog this out as we see what the travel market will look like. And we also see just the COVID pandemic as being just the driver of things we saw in the past and new things for acceleration of change. So both on the IFC side and on the airline side. So we're seeing a lot more interest in diversification of services on the airline side versus just a straight data transmission platform to the aircraft. We're seeing a lot more interest in diversified content, entertainment, customer engagement options. No touch is a big theme. So from a software services standpoint, no touch shopping on board, which can be enabled with connectivity. So we're seeing 2021 as an opportunity. For us, we saw some glimmers of hope in 2020. We did our first install on Turkish Airlines, so Turkish Airlines narrow body. So it wasn't a complete shutdown of the world. We still saw progress. We still saw customer engagement. We still see IFC as a foundational platform for airlines in the future to engage with their customers. We see that engagement as being different than the first 10 years of connectivity. We think the second decade of connectivity is going to be much more performance oriented from the data side and much more service oriented on the airline side and much more customer focused. As much as we spent a decade getting connectivity to really just work and be functional and do the basic things it needs to do, we see the second decade of connectivity as really taking connectivity to the forefront of what we call entertainment, what we call in-flight customer experience.
Thanks for that, Mike. And you did mention about the business model. So is it because of the integration of entertainment and no-touch purchases, which got accelerated again due to COVID-19? So these were the elements of those business model which helped the business to continue the relationship with the airline, or was it something else?
No, there is some of that. That's a big piece of it. I mean, at Global Eagle, we don't look at ourselves as just a data pipe. We look at ourselves as a full service company. So we handle everything from the hardware to the data to services that run on top of it. And so that helped us in that we know our airline customers are looking for all those multiple avenues to deliver a positive customer experience for their passengers.
Okay, sure. Thanks for that. And how do you see the industry or the end requirements? Obviously, you did mention that no touch purchase, no touch entertainment, or direct. I think the requirement is transitioning towards the use of personal systems using the onboard Wi-Fi. So are you seeing any trend in terms of how the end user requirement is changing from the airline point of view and from the passenger point of view?
For sure, we definitely are. I mean, there's one element of it that you can see with connectivity. You can measure kind of usage of connectivity on kind of megabytes consumed, data consumed, and with fewer passengers flying and more available performance, we certainly saw individual user consumption skyrocket. just absolutely skyrocket in terms of demand. So we see demand there. We saw the demand trends change, and we see those as being certainly for 2020 and into 2021. We see the demand profile, the persona of the passenger change dramatically. It's not a business traveler. It's a much more leisure consumer traveler. So it's, if you imagine, the internet is a vast place, but and most people go to the same kind of concentrated set of sites. But all of the edge cases on that, where there's still a tremendous amount of traffic, we saw shifts from business oriented usage and business focus to leisure focus and kind of health focus, obviously. We saw destination kind of content. We saw destination information become absolutely critical, because as you boarded an aircraft in a COVID environment, you really needed to know what was on the other side when the plane landed. It's no longer kind of the familiarity of every airport is an airport. So we saw trends like that. And we see that continuing into 2021. We do see a business travel recovery, but we do believe that will take, in particular on the international travel front, a few years. Certainly in concentrated markets, so European concentrated market, Asia Pac concentrated market, North America concentrated market, we see an acceleration of domestic business travel in those markets faster than we see international travel. On the other hand, we see, I won't call it an explosion, but we do see a growth prospect for leisure international travel returning fairly quickly. People have been grounded for a year, and there was certainly strong travel trends in 2019. I mean, I can see from our company, and I'm sure the other panelists would probably agree, that the aviation business was going gangbusters. I mean, it was really, really going hard. And so when we look at 2020, it's not a shutdown. It's a return to 2012 or 2013 levels. And we see a quick return back to 2020 and beyond levels over the next couple of years. But a couple of years in the aviation business is pretty quickly. Runs pretty fast.
Sure. Talking about increased usage from the passenger point of view and greater demand of capacity, there is this business model, like free service model, is being discussed within the IFC market segment. I would like to ask this question from Jags, like, how far is the industry? Because obviously with this model, the quantum of capacity which will be needed in order to service those aircraft, it is going to skyrocket, it is going to multifold. So how far do you believe, or do you think that this service model is from a satellite operator point of view?
I fully understood the question, Vivek, in terms of like how far away are we from what? Do we have enough capacity, or?
In terms of capacity supply. So
okay, I suppose.
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
In my view, is that capacity varies, right, regionally and globally, right? So, for example, Inmarsat have their GX platform, which gives you the fabric at a global level at the KA. But for me, where I look at the peak densities, European market, North American, certain aspects of Asian market, I look for density. So there's a lot of deep KU density in certain areas. North America has a lot of KA and KU. So in some areas, maybe we're going to have overcapacity of KA for a period of time, followed by an undercapacity of KU. It just sort of depends on how you want to look at it. I totally agree that the demand profile is changing, but for me, it's more about how fast are the number of aircraft going to get back to what we need? Who are they carrying and when, and what are they actually doing? And I suspect we may have maybe enough capacity for a period of time, but it's still going to boil down to, do you ever have enough capacity in the absolute hotspot where you need it, i.e. within 100 kilometers of an airport at 8 o'clock in the morning or over a certain other area? So I think some of the density issues still exist, but from at least my perspective, what I see is I think capacity-wise, we might be okay in certain markets. Airlines have got what they've got, but I don't see a lot of airlines saying, I have a lot of money to go and spend on brand new growth. Aircraft deliveries are going to slow down. Retirement's going to speed up. So it's almost like we're going to get a correction of the total number of people or devices doing something, which sort of alleviates some of the tension and the pressure on the network overall. So for me, one satellite supplier never has all that they need. You're always either aggregating in and densifying, but you sort of hope you have most of what you need. So when you're Intelsat, SES, or Eutelsat, we sort of have our capacities for multi-sectors, But within aviation, I've always accepted that, I'm not going to have everything I need. I may need to buy from Intelsat or SES or regional or whatever to get what I need to deliver the end user quality of service or the SLA required. So, yeah, I mean, sorry for maybe the unclarity, but I think capacity-wise, we might be okay for a period of time. And there's enough satellites being built and constellations coming that between LEO, MEO, GEO, as long as you're somewhat hardware agnostic and maybe somewhat frequency agnostic, if you aggregate in and you drop your ego as a satellite operator, there should be enough capacity to provide needs. It just depends if you have a bias that I only believe in LEO or I only believe in GEO. I think you just have to adjust and say, I think the right thing for the mission is what I need to find. Should I own it? Should I buy it? Or should I do something in between?
Could I jump in there, actually, just because I think Jags raises a very good point, because one thing certainly that we're seeing, and I think I'm going to be a little more biased in favour of Inmarsat, as you might expect, but I think Jags does raise a good point that particularly in aviation, and particularly what we've seen so far, and maybe for the next year or so, we're going to see these, I was going to say false starts, not quite the right expression. We're going to see, it's going to be very difficult to predict where aviation picks up and where it gets held back by a third or a fourth wave or some issue, a new variant of the virus that holds back a particular region, for example. One thing that we'd identified anyway is the way that across all of our vertical markets, maritime, land, aviation, for example, there is going to be fluid demand. It is going to be difficult to understand exactly where the market, which region. This was actually pre-COVID anyway, but COVID just makes it more peaky, I think, in terms of accentuating these difficulties to predict. Though we've seen China recover, the domestic Chinese market in particular, I think the US domestic market has been relatively robust. And all of these things may change. Europe may come back a lot stronger, depending on the vaccine situation there. So this fluidity of demand and the way that Inmarsat ourselves were looking with our Ka-band technology to build out, we're committed to developing and implementing more satellites now than we've ever done before at Ka-band. We're going to launch 7 satellites over the next 3 or 4 years to massively increase the demand on our network, to try and stay ahead of the demand curve. And we know in aggregate we will do that. We're just not 100% sure, and this was pre-COVID anyway, but exactly where it was going to emerge. So COVID is going to put even more emphasis on flexibility and the ability to move your satellite capacity asset around where that demand emerges. And that's certainly the way that we're shaping our network with the technology, the cost base, and the cost effectiveness of procuring and launching and integrating new satellite capacity in our network. And I think Jags was right in terms of this flexibility, but we feel that we can do it within our network with our Ka-band satellites. And that's our take on things. And as I say, COVID has just put more emphasis on the fluidity of demand and the ability to be able to react flexibly to put that demand where it does emerge, and then ultimately will be sustained as aviation recovers more forcibly, 2023 onwards.
Yeah, sure. And looking from the price point of the capacity demand, how do you think, David, is it going to play a role for the penetration of these service model like free data to the end user?
It's a good question. I think one thing I would say, and I'm sure the panelists would agree, we are operating in a competitive market, both at the aviation, at the air transport connectivity level, but also at the satellite level as well. It's a competitive market, and it's like all IT markets, costs are going down. Certainly in Inmarsat, certainly the satellite industry, the launcher industry, there are all ways in which our technology is becoming more efficient and becoming cheaper, and that will flow through to the actual cost of connectivity. The way that connectivity is actually priced and packaged is something where We certainly have been providing free models, freemium models, where messaging may be given away free or basic internet access is free, and a charge model for streaming. But we've also been successfully operating a totally free model with several customers in different parts of the world, very successfully, to include streaming, to include operations to low-cost carriers. So it's been possible to provide a freemium model. It's been possible to support a third-party paying model for some time. And the key point is, I think it's appropriate to keep all of these models, including the charged model, available to be able to flexibly meet particular requirements of the customer and the passengers that they fly. And that will only become more and more apparent. There is a lot of interest in the freemium model. It may become the dominant model, but I think it's not going to be to the total exclusion of everything else. We will always be looking at ways in which we can leverage connectivity revenues themselves directly from passengers, from third-party sponsors, from the airline recognizing the service enhancement benefit, but also let's also not lose sight of the further ancillary revenue streams that can come from new content, new services, e-commerce, and other business models that will emerge as part of the wider digital transformation in aviation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, moving to Nick again, because Delta and GoGo contract and the announcement for free service model has been around for some time. And Nick, if you could give us the state about that progression, and what are all the key areas where do you see the challenges in terms of executing that business model?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, so, free Wi-Fi is incredibly important to us. It's clearly on our roadmap going forward. It's something that we're hearing from airlines that they're wanting more and more, and clearly passengers are in turn. But I do agree, it's all about the demand and the capacity. What has become very apparent to us now, GoGo Commercial Aviation, is that we now have access to this capacity that Intelsat holds. And more importantly, we now have the ability to be able to shape that, we're actually having those detailed discussions, with as Intelsat, to now shape that capacity going future. Layering that capacity in the areas where it's required, those high traffic routes that have already been mentioned, and shaping the future satellites to be able to serve that demand as and where it's required. There are examples of free service out there today. As David mentioned, typically sort of aimed at premium cabins or certain areas. But they do work. A good example of that is the relationship we have with T-Mobile in the US. It's a relationship which we've had for a number of years now. It started off whereby T-Mobile were able to offer a simple sort of messaging platform to their existing subscribers, and that's now turned into Wi-Fi packages for their subscribers. It's been terrifically successful. So yeah, that is absolutely very, very important to us, free, and developing those relationships and partnerships, those third-party payers, if you like, to come into the relationship and enable that going forward.
Sure. So can we take this as a summary that a lot of capacity is coming, and those capacities will bring down the price, and then there are multiple business models which could, moving forward, help in the execution of free service model, and this could be a viable and most prominent service model moving forward.
Absolutely.
Can we take this as the summary of the last few minutes of the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe that's absolutely true. We're certainly going to see better economics, lower pricing, higher volumes going forward. There's going to be more capacity specifically available for Aero, certainly from Intelsat. And I think that we know that the demand is there. passengers want to be connected, but more importantly, aircraft need to be connected. Airline operations need to be connected. So there are a number of applications and services which will be driving this demand going forward. And now is the time to start planning that innovation. To plan that new network capacity going forward. And we are taking time now to do exactly that, to serve our airline customers going forward.
Sure. Thanks for that. And coming to Michael, again, in terms of equipment pricing, what do you feel? How critical is the equipment pricing for the service penetration in the IFC market?
I think that very much depends on the airline, obviously, and the airline economics and the airline's business models. What we're seeing, and just sort of to echo some of the other panelists, on the satellite side, we don't see any supply issues. We don't see any unavailability of supply. We don't see any demand issues. I think the demand is obvious. It's connecting the dots in there on a business model standpoint. And from the equipment side standpoint, we're seeing more and more airlines come to the table with an appropriate equipment price and appropriate equipment option built into their core business models as an airline. It was one thing, in the past decade to go to an airline and present an equipment option that it's expensive. Satellite equipment is expensive. Putting things on airplanes is expensive. It was one thing to present them options on that and see vast fleets and see sort of the not just the price of the equipment, but there's a disruption factor too of putting things on airplanes. See that. We're seeing airlines today that understand that fundamentally and understand the return on that investment. We are seeing price pressure. We are certainly seeing airlines want prices for equipment sets to go down, and we are executing on that with multiple designs, flexible designs. Our Turkish install is a hybrid design for us. It's using some Turkish Technique equipment that they've brought to the table that really fit the platform, fit the product line for them, fit the mix, and our system. So I think what we're going to see in the future is equipment and connectivity is built into the core business models for how an airline wants to offer its service. It's no longer just pricing fuel or estimating labor costs. It will be this service as well, and it'll be core in the offering. So we don't see an end to pricing pressure on both the network side and the equipment side, but we see more a closeness to reality in the conversations with airline customers. One of the things I would say too, and when we look at the future of the market, we're all looking at return. We're all looking at sort of return to kind of the old fleets. I would say from our perspective at Global Eagle, we see a fairly large transformation happening in the aviation space. We see a lot of opportunity for new airlines to enter the space, a lot of new market participants that have different business models built up from that core. And we see a lot of, scrappiness. We see a lot of scrappiness in the airline. I think David called it flexibility. I call it scrappiness. And, there are a lot of retired planes out there and people want to fly them. Leasing companies want to lease them. And connectivity and the services that can go on those, we see a lot of potential for differentiation in the market. And we see that as, kind of a positive item, opposed to, yes, we do see COVID having differential impacts on a regional basis. But we're looking at that kind of flexibility on it.
And I also did speak with multiple airlines, and one question they have while they kind of plan to implement the IFC services, question is like KU or KA, or why should I pay for the dual band antenna? So what's your comment over this?
Oh, well, I would prefer not to go back to the 2015-2016 Battle of the Bands. That was the common trade show circuit panelists. At Global Eagle, I'll say we've always been band agnostic. So we see supply available in both KU and KA. Everywhere we have been requested to provide it, we've never had a customer come to us and ask us to provide connectivity to them and us not be able to build a network out. Now, we've done KU. We've been very, very successful in KU. KA is there. KA is available. We have an equipment set for KA ready to go. Can be installed on an airplane if the business model makes sense, if the partnerships make sense, if the network service costs make sense. We're ready to do it. That's not kind of how we look at the world. I think from an airline perspective, they should move away from a KU-KA discussion, and this is something we have to them, and go straight to an SLA discussion. And that's the hardest kind of conversation you would think a party like us has to have with the customer, but we welcome those conversations because we think by talking about service level, we talk about what that airline wants. So when we talk about even free to the passenger, free services, free isn't really anything. Free streaming really isn't anything. What it is a service level that matters, what you're willing to sign up on a contract basis. And we then engage with the customer on that basis. And it really brings to light a lot of kind of what the customer's going for in the market.
Yeah, I really, I totally agree with that. I heard a good analogy this week at KU, KA. It's a bit like, the Mac and the PC. I mean, we're kind of through that debate now. It's really about how the network is utilized and the fundamental applications and services that are provided. You're absolutely right, and the SLA discussion is key to that discussion. But the actual baseline technology, I think, is an important factor. But nevertheless, I think both KU and KA have their place today.
So, as the one biased player in this, and I think we've all been around the Battle of the Bands for years and years and years. But I must admit, one trend we are seeing, I think there's an acceptance of different ways of skinning the cat. But one trend that certainly we've seen more so in the last 12 months, 12 to 18 months or so anyway, is there does appear to be more preference being expressed for KA band, which hasn't always happened before, but certain carriers are coming out and saying, no, I want this technology, I don't want to entertain KU band, in terms of the way things are going. And that's probably less to do with maybe less to do with the band itself. It's about the providers of the band or the way that the market is shaping up. But there is a preference in multiple regions around the world where KA is now certainly more accepted, and we certainly get less involved in those discussions because KA is the desired technology. It's just a statement of fact in a number of the programs that we're working.
Vivek, just to sort of add on to that, there's just a couple of pieces I wanted to add. One was around free and also narrative on price. So I'll start with the KUKA. I agree with the panelists. I think I don't meet any airlines, and I meet a lot of them. And it's not because I approach them to sell them. It's really just to make sure, do we have a strong understanding of where they're going? But airlines will say, I've never cared. I only made it an issue because the supply side made it an issue. And the supply side, I think, was ultimately driven by the satellite guy. So in a way, I think we have to, as a satellite team, take responsibility for that debate. But it really is, if the density is there and it makes commercial sense and it profiles the mission, then I think it works. So KA density, for example, in North America, makes sense for people to consider that more. In Europe, I think you'll have both. You have a decent density of KA, decent density of KU. I wanted to talk a little bit about free and price. So, as Michael mentioned about service level agreements, I've always been a big fan of experience level agreements. So take everything aside, what experience are you prepared to pay for? And the price narrative, for me, it's price is something I try and keep people away from. It's what is the value of this to you? Is it worth 10 euros? Is it worth 20? Is it worth 30? Because of course you can make it a price issue. And once you're in price, you're just running to the bottom, which we see in maritime and other sectors. So the real challenge here is if you really have value and USPs and propositions, then it's really about convincing the customer and demonstrating what that value is. And then it's clear to assign what the price can be. So that's what I'm sort of seeing, that airlines are definitely more mature, as Michael and David and Nick know. They're more aware of IFC 2.0, 3.0. So there's more reality. And it's not a mass market. So how cheap can hardware really get when you only have 30,000 components or 40? It's not like a 5 million piece market or a 20 million piece market where you can do something. So I think there's going to be certain caps on what we can do. But free is just, so this is my personal view on free. I think free is the craziest thing the industry has ever wanted. And I'll tell you why. Everyone tells me on a day-to-day basis how much people want this service and we need this service. I'm like, great. why would you give it away for free? Like, you can ask any 101 business kid, it's like, yeah, I've got a service that everybody wants and they're really desperate to have it and they're prepared to really just forfeit so much. Would you give it away for free? And I always ask the airlines, you take money from my baggage, you take money from my seat, you're brilliant at extracting money from me. Why do you want to give this away for free? And I've yet to get a decent answer. I understand the intent and the desire. I absolutely do that. Hey, it fits in, it's my profile. And it's the ROI question too. People say there's got to have an ROI. It's like, well, there's no ROI on IFE. There's no ROI on an elevator in a hotel that's 20 stories high. It's simply the cost of business. So would you build infrastructure with connectivity or without? And the most strategically aligned airlines say, well, clearly I need to be connected for all the reasons that Nick, David, Michael have said: operation, service, experience, efficiency. So for me, I think at Eutelsat, what we're seeing is the key narratives of the future are, what is the value proposition you're going to have? It's nothing to do with the frequency band. And what does free really mean? Because someone ultimately has to pay. But, why do you want to give something for free when there's such a clear demand? So I just wanted to sort of share that, at least on the free piece, because I think I keep hearing the free thing that everybody's desperate to go there. I'm like, great, why? Because it's people clearly want to pay for it and they clearly value the service. Again, I just wanted to sort of share that before you go on to your next question.
Jags, let's limit that though, because I don't want to pay for coffee on airlines, and I really, really want coffee on an airline.
Fair enough.
Good coffee too.
Yeah, and Nick, you might add here as well, because although connectivity on a lot of airlines or aircraft has been available, but the take rates have been around 13 to 15% on an average, right? This is a free service, and then this like auxiliary revenue stream, which is expected out of the industry, is driving this free service model market, right?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's another area where an airline can differentiate. They can attract and retain passengers, and we're seeing that, particularly in the US, where competition is extremely high. So I think that there certainly will be more of a demand for this. There's this battle against the economics, but we think the capacity is there, and certainly we're prepared to put the capacity, even more capacity, there for this to the future to support this type of application service.
The issue of free at the point of sale is more a question of who pays, because everyone recognises a cost associated with it, and it can be borne by the passenger or the airline or a third party. And that's where the flexibility comes in. I think one of the things, to the question about take rates, it certainly helps remove the friction associated with passengers adopting a service if it's not actually going to cost them anything. But there's other sides to that in terms of increasing the convenience of using a service. This is something that certainly the cellular or picocell services from the likes of Ceta on Air, or Ceta for Aircraft, and Aeromobile shows the convenience that adoption rates go through, and take-up rates go through the roof when it's as convenient as just switching your phone on and that's all you have to do. So issues around improving the convenience and frictionless use of these services, whether it's the various Wi-Fi roaming technologies that are being rolled out, and certainly that we're implementing at the current time, or other ways in which connectivity may be provided, in particular in the post-COVID world. I think it was Mike mentioned about contactless. Touchless, contactless, the ways in which in-flight magazines are disappearing from the passenger cabin for whatever reason, whether it's hygiene or weight saving, for example. These drive passengers to then need to use their favorite device, whether it's a phone or a tablet, to interact with the crew for food and beverage service, but also it's the perfect opportunity for them. They got the device out, they're used to using their own device, familiar and way, they'll then connect with it. And that's one of the trends we've seen. It caught our attention immediately with one of our carriers that did this, where we saw take-up rates shoot up. The blunt answer is give it away to free, and you will then get a take rate of 30, 40, 60%, as we've seen on some of our carriers. when it's free. But it's not just about the price, it's the convenience and the fact you don't have to get your wallet out and plug in a credit card number or whatever it would be. So let's not get so fixated on actual free, which is not dissimilar to what Jags was saying. There is value there, but it's just, people are lazy. Just make it as easy as possible to get onto the network, and they will get onto the network.
We agree with that from our perspective. We as much as we've seen take rate increase from kind of just general demand for connectivity, general sort of market trends on take rate increasing, we believe we've seen fairly significant take rate increases because of reduction in friction. The early days of connectivity, it was more difficult than it needed to be to get on the network. So we've seen that. I would also say too, like we haven't seen any airline in the last few years that have come to us and looked at current take rates. Connectivity is a big decision. Connectivity is a long-term decision. So the concept of free, the concept of large take rates, the concept of usage is a projection forward for most airlines. And so when we engage with airlines, we're not talking about kind of what's going on now or going on in the next year. We're talking about what's going on in the next 5 to 10 years for that equipment set to be installed on an airplane. So that longevity of that run rate of that equipment is a key driver in our assessments with airlines.
Yes, sure. So clearly a very interesting point that reducing friction is also a key variable in order to improve the take rates. And moving forward, obviously one is price. Either reduce the price or bring in the free service model and reduce the friction. Moving forward as an IFC stakeholder, how do you see the key strategies are going to evolve for different players within the value chain in the next 3 to 5 years? Because as all panelists agreed upon that it will take minimum 3 to 4 years, like up till 2024 it will take for the market to entirely recover. So in that gap period or in that recovery phase or the period, what should be the key strategies of different players in the value chain in order to keep the market moving forward?
Well, Vivek, maybe I can have the shortest answer because I've got maybe some of the least skin compared to sort of Nick, David, and Michael. But from Eutelsat, it's just we're doing business as usual, right? Megahertz and capacity sales and moving to managed service. But I think in terms of key strategy for us is one, just to be mindful of where the sector's going and making sure we continue to be a part player of capacity. But really one of the trends I see is almost a bridging option that for the next 2 to 5 years or 3 years, airlines are saying, connectivity is an absolute given. I have to do it. I'm going to do it. But right now I have something on board. Maybe I can find a way to find a bridge. And there's been at least maybe 14, 15 airlines in the last 12 months who have come to me specifically and said, I've got hardware and I'm out of contract, or I've come to a situation where I can't work with my service operator, right? It's either a financial or an economic or a legal issue. And they're saying, is there any way that I can get a bridging solution to take it forward? Of course, that's not simple, right? Certification, PMA, all the complexities that go with it. But I feel that for people who aren't vested into this, there may be small segments of opportunity to go and learn and enter certain parts of the value chain without taking all the risk. And then the natural supply side, which is, Inmarsat, Viasat, Gogo, Intelsat, GE, they will continue being maybe the staple part of the business. Because for me, I look out 10 years that once 85% of the market is penetrated and all aircraft are installed, what do you do? It's not about I've got new hardware to do. It's like if I want to change from one to another, going back to David's frictionless point, when I have 200 aircraft and you tell me I can go from one to the other by changing out all my hardware, I don't want to hear that. I want you to tell me how you're going to bridge me from one place to another. And it's a super hard thing. And I've always spoken about it. And I think there's a reason it's not done, right? It's super hard. It's very difficult and it's near impossible in some ways. But I feel that this commercial necessity, which has been driven by COVID, all COVID has shown is a systemic issue that was somewhat already there. It's just brought it really to the top. And it's not because we were trying to create a bad industry. It's just been difficult to sort of create economics at work. So I think there's an interim strategy for some players to see if there's ways to bridge with airlines for the next few years. And then really it's more about how does the supply side of the vertical guys, the Inmarsats, Viasats, and Intelsat Go, if you want to include that, fit with whatever Global Eagle and others do. So it's going to be an interesting play for us specifically because we're a little bit more out. I think we have a few more things to consider. If you're closer in, and obviously the other guys will answer, I think you have more determined strategies that have to be adopted.
Michael, can you do that?
So for the next 3 to 5 years, we just see tremendous disruption. We see tremendous opportunities for just paradigm shifts in the industry. And so from a Global Eagle perspective, one of the things we're doing is prepping for disruption, prepping for a rapid increase in cadence in various regions, and prepping for potential for those paradigm shifts. So we see a lot of changes in space happening. I don't think I don't think anybody's unaware of what SpaceX is doing. I don't think anyone's unaware of what Telesat is doing. We see a lot of disruption in the hardware space for aviation IFC hardware. I don't think anyone's unaware of ESA discussions that have been going on for some time, and a lot of technologies are coming into the market. I don't think anybody's unaware of the need for more digitization of airlines, the need for more extending of the value proposition of connectivity beyond the passenger, sort of beyond the pipe, as we call it. So we see just tremendous opportunities for disruption and shifts in each of those areas. And at Global Eagle, we're preparing for being scrappy, being flexible, and being very, very opportunistic about the market. And that's our plan for the next 3 to 5 years.
Okay, Nick.
Yeah, I certainly. I mean, I think challenge brings opportunity. I think we've seen Intelsat slightly shift from being that wholesale capacity provider to, being very close to customers. We've somewhat taken out the middleman. I think there is a confused part of the market there where you've got multiple service providers, equipment providers, satellite providers, all telling the same story. And I think that, this sort of consolidation, as we've seen, clear that up. We'll now be able to provide that end-to-end service. It'll be one contract. And I think that will very much help us to plan for our network and services going forward.
Thanks for that, Nick. David, forward-looking strategies for Inmarsat?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've done what we see as our role to help be the disruptor with regard to accelerating the quicker, the increased cadence in getting new satellite capacity into space much more efficiently, taking advantage of people like SpaceX in launch costs and all of those good things. I think we also fully agree that IFC connectivity is absolutely a hygiene factor. There is no question that virtually every airline in the world will need to have this. And I think, in the reality of the situation that we're all in a post-COVID world, it is going to be essential. But more so than anything else, given all of the good things that we've talked about in connectivity itself and passenger or device level connectivity, the bigger picture is around digital transformation. It's the way in which airlines can help accelerate their recovery from the COVID situation, using digital transformation, food and beverage, retail, ancillary revenue, cost reductions, weight saving, hygiene, all around contactless, streamlining their operations, doing things more cost effectively with less contact with passengers are going to be the key trends. But all of those features were evident anyway in digital transformation. And as we've seen on the ground in retail services, COVID has had the habit of massively accelerating by order of magnitude trends that were evident anyway. And I think digital transformation in aviation, those airlines that grab hold of digital transformation were doing it anyway or on the verge of doing it and have pushed forward to accelerate. They will be the success stories. And that's what we're positioning around to facilitate and build in connectivity is just one basic element of that as part of a wider suite of connectivity benefits to airlines and their passengers.
Yes, sure. Thanks for that. That is interesting. And so we have come towards the end of our discussion. I just have one last question, and it's on consolidation. So, David, I'll start with you. Do you think that after Intelsat and Gogo, like Gogo's commercial aviation acquisition by Intelsat, is there any further room for consolidation in the market, or?
From what Gogo and Intelsat have done, I don't think Inmarsat's necessarily in a position to comment on that. Other than glad to see that Intelsat has seen the way that Inmarsat has been operating as being relevant. That said, and one of the expressions that I'm disappointed none of the other panelists have used so far, but for a long time, for decades on these sorts of panels, we'll talk about horses for courses. The business models, or in this particular instance, the distribution models for services, do need to be flexible across the globe, across different carriers. We try and do that within our model. We do have the vertically integrated model as the way that we've achieved a lot of success, particularly recently. But our partners, the wider ecosystem that Inmarsat enjoys, does have a role to play in all of our marketplaces. There are value adds. There are players who have greater intimacy and proximity with customers, and they all have a role to play.
Yeah. I'll go next to Jax. Jax, your comment, please, over the possible scope of further consolidation.
I'm sure consolidation will continue in the market. My personal preference is I don't really see a need from it from my perspective. In that I think there's going to be enough disruption that really creating deep intimacy with the ecosystem and finding really good collaborative ways to work may be a good way for the next period of time. And then, if there's hyper consolidation in the future, like horizontally or vertically, that can be done by industrial groups. But for me, I totally understand why Intelsat would buy Gogo. It totally makes sense why somebody may pick up, PAC or whatever it is. But for me, I just feel that they're extremely high value acquisitions, and I believe that you could spend the same money or a lot less money to go and get a similar impact. But that's just my view based on the amount of disruption coming. So consolidation is clearly going to happen, but I hope that we at Eutelsat take a more, let's look at what's new, let's see what the emerging sectors are, and see how that fits in. And what does consolidation mean for us? Is it about deeper intimacy and better relationships, or is it about I really need to own because I can create better synergies and better efficiency?
Okay, thanks for that. Mike or Nick, your viewpoints on possible scope of consolidation within the value chain?
I mean, certainly consolidation has been a topic on the agenda, on the table for a long time in the industry. People have seen it as sort of almost obvious. I guess from our perspective, we don't see consolidation as necessarily obvious. We think that there's a definitely disruption for the next 3 to 5 years that might lead to consolidation. I think from our perspective, we're looking at what are the benefits to the customer at the end of the day in terms of performance, price, and flexibility. And if a consolidated market delivers those benefits to the customer, then the market will decide that. If they don't, the market will decide to go a different direction. And we also just don't necessarily look at consolidation on the satellite to kind of integrator side. We look at consolidation on both that horizontal and vertical side. And we think there's opportunities there, but from our perspective, we don't start with the consolidation just for the benefit of consolidation. We start with what's the key drivers for the customer experience.
Thanks for that. Nick, any closing comments there?
No, thank you. I'd just say, that, I think the consolidation that we've seen with Gogo and Intelsat has, from my experience, has been incredibly successful so far. We're seeing certain synergies that we see certain areas of both companies that have, real value, that things that we couldn't have done before and things that they now have access to. So it's huge benefits for us going forward. I think we probably may see some further consolidation in the industry, but as the other panelists have said, it's all about delivering the the best possible service, product services to our airline customers and partners going forward.
Sure. Thanks for that. So we have come to the end of the discussion, and I would like to say sincere thanks to all the panel members for all the insightful discussions on the IFC market for 2020 and beyond. Bottom line for the industry I can take away from this discussion is, yes, the industry is recovering, but the long-term fundamental, we can say, remains strong, and looking forward to speaking with you all in the future. Thanks, everyone, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Over to you, Chris.
Cheers, Vivek. Thank you very much, Jags. Thank you, David. Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Mike. Really appreciate your insights and your participation in the panel today. Thank you all very much. And thank you for joining us. I look forward to having you here again next week. And please feel free to pass along the link to registration, which, again, I remind you is free. Let your colleagues know if they're interested in any of the upcoming topics that we've got here. And you can check the appsat.com website for a schedule of our upcoming topics that we'll be looking at. Please do feel free to get in touch with us at info@apscc.or.kr if you're interested in speaking on a panel, participating in one of our webinars, or for that matter, for sponsoring it. And likewise, if you're interested in joining APSCC, please follow the website at apscc.or.kr. Thanks again. We look forward to seeing you next week.